first of all, Brendan, I'm not sure when Brendan arrived, it was only a few months ago, but he's really organized things, I have to say. So, and also for those of you who are poets in the audience, and I think we have a number, please do take a look at the call for poets. You will be accepting applications for a while. And that exhibit out there, the calligraphy exhibit, is just stunning. It really is worth your while, if you don't live here, to take a little bit of time after the reading or during the reception to take a look at some of the work. I do want to say and acknowledge that this program, and as I've said each time that I open this up, is that it's been going since 2005 and was started by Don Berger, who was Takoma Park's first poet laureate. Ann Becker, who was here, was the second poet laureate, and she did numbers of things in terms of collaborations of poets and artists, and a workshop that's still running, and Clara Jones has been in that workshop. I'll let you know about that. And Mary Beth Hayden and Meredith Pond, who are back here, are on the committee, and also Madonna LeBlanc and myself. And one other person that we have to mention, and that is Sarah Daines, who's the head of Housing and Community Development. And, Brendan is working with her, and this whole arts work that's going on is under her jurisdiction or supervision or encouragement, all of that. You know that the readings are filmed. They're broadcast live here within the Takoma Park Circle, public access station, but they also go up on YouTube within the next week. So you can let all your friends know and send out on your Facebook page and let them know it's from Takoma Park, the Third Thursday Poetry Series. I've often referred to an old poem. I think we would write it differently these days, but Louis Simpson, who wrote about American poetry, he said, whatever it is, it must have a stomach that can digest rubber, coal, uranium, moons, poems. Like the shark, it contains a shoe. It must swim for miles through the desert, uttering cries that are almost human. As I say, I think to these days we might have, if we were all to write what American poetry is and using that as a schema, we might have some other concrete elements in there. But I think, one of the things that's been so terrific about this series, one, because of its consistency, is that we get, we've been having usually 3 poets. And in a sense, what we're doing is we're entering into their poetic universe each time. And that can mean many things, of course. What they're attentive to. They call our attention to things that we're not often attentive to, and it often makes us aware. And then it's the distinctiveness that is that whole conglomerate of things having to do with language, whether it's metaphor or not, its tone, there are a whole range of things. And the thing that's always been true, I say always, these years that I've been coming to these poetry readings, are the different voices that we have. And it almost works by chance. I mean, the committee is selecting poets, but there is a certain amount of chance in all of that. So, Jason Gebhardt will be reading first, and then Michael Gushue and Clara Jones, if she shows up. Her ride, who has not shown up, there was some difficulty in getting a taxi, so we'll see. We may or may not have Clara tonight. So, I spent some time reading the poems of, Michael's poems I've known for a long time, but Jason's poems that I've just been reading in this last week, at least the ones that I have. And I sometimes make some general comments, which may not be true, but it gives you something to react to, perhaps. I mean, I think if I had to, not that I have to, but if I had to identify one quality of, at least in the poems that I've read of Jason's, it's a kind of attentiveness to detail, a kind of exactitude. And I just take some examples, and I just checked to see that some of the examples that I have are not poems that you're reading tonight. But just to give you an idea what I mean, one example is called Digressions at the Toddler Park with iPhone. And Francis cranks the ignition of the sun-bleached plastic Jeep. He has to push his sneakers against the polyethylene playground turf, Flintstone style, to let it go. Now, if all of us will be writing a poem that began with some of those images, I'm not sure that we would have those elements, all those elements. there's the plastic Jeep, but it's sun bleached, polyethylene playground turf. It's, when I say, that exactitude or that attention to details, there's a poem with an infant son who has a laminated chart of local birds in his hands, and he's an infant, and he's gumming the corner of the plastic, bird chart, and it's featuring an eastern meadowlark, and the father plays the meadowlark song on a website that the son can hear, so he can hear the sound that goes with the bird. He said, and the bird, the sound auto repeats its pitch of tiny hunger collected perhaps years ago by a microphone hidden in the grass near the opening of its arch over a nest of woven weeds. It's not just the sound, but it's the poet imagining where that sound comes from. That's that attentiveness to details, and it's the kind of attentiveness that I think you might be listening for. That's not the only thing. But at any rate, I'm very happy to welcome Jason to read.
Hi, I'm Jason. I just wanted to thank Takoma Park. This is wonderful that they have a series for poets, and also to thank Merrill for that wonderful introduction. So I actually, I wanted to start off by reading a couple newer poems, and just in the last year, I don't know about being in Takoma Park, I imagine maybe you might you might have some of the same feelings that I've been having about the current administration and what's been happening. So it's sort of been kind of creeping into my writing too, my feelings and anxieties about it. So I thought I'd read a few of those poems that you might hear some of that in there. The first one is called Digressions at the Toddler Park with iPhone. And Francis is my son. At this point, he's about 2 years old in this poem. So, Francis cranks the ignition of the sun-bleached plastic Jeep, not knowing he has to hum the engine's sound himself. That he has to, and no matter, I should have checked the time so I'd know. Sorry. Okay, 7:54. Liz, you're gonna throw something at me? Okay. Francis cranks the ignition of the sun-bleached plastic Jeep, not knowing he has to hum the engine's sound himself. And no matter how hard he pushes his sneakers, Flintstone style, against the polyethylene playground turf, the doorless, bent-axled car won't go, enacting my simultaneous desire to stay where I am and get somewhere else. I tap that perfect yellow circle of sun among the checkerboard of icons on my iPhone, and Francis scrapes off to the meadowy Milky Way of buttercups and dandelions outside the gate. The screen is insisting the sky will be without rain, but there's cloud cover I know to be the exact sorrowful purple of the Department of Motor Vehicles. And when I brush the Times app, the news scrolls like a piano roll run through a shredder, blaring the North Korean Missile Parade Band's rendition of Hail to the Chief. Though not as loud as the duck duck of Francis's calling to a couple of those awkwardly outsized bumblebees spinning around him, then hovering apart in standoff or courtship. He points to them, releasing the fistful of flowers he's gathered into a little sun. Okay. So this one is, so no inaugural poem this time around, right? I don't know if you guys noticed that. So this poem is dated January 20th, 2017, and it's called In the Absence of an Inaugural Poem. Not long after the autumnal equinox, when screws finally strip the wood they've been mated to for years, and the boiler pump wakes chirping for oil, we closed November over us like a lid on a bin of smoldering leaves. Today, I'm up early enough to sit alone at the kitchen table and take in the pure, clear clock tick of human absence, imagining others doing the same in faraway places, like Kingman, Arizona, or Winner, South Dakota, where I picture snow silently piling a white hat on the M of their McDonald's sign, while I work to make something that can reach out like a perfectly broken in baseball mitt. Okay. So my 2-year-old, I have 3 kids. I have a 2-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And so I'm their primary caregiver during the day and the night. And my 2-year-old does not like to sleep very much. So this poem was written around the time when he was very much not sleeping. It's called Etymology. Unnapping Francis. Innappable at noon. At midnight, not exactly insomniac or sleepless. Unsleepable, perhaps? No, no right word, just as there's none for my thoughts when they gather the dry lawn clippings and stray strips of plastic packaging from my mind's yard in order to weave a nest for brooding over. But I'm feeling safe momentarily, a strangely childlike emotion for a grown man to cop to, as Francis tears a fatal helping of A from the Merriam-Webster. Safe from salvus, literally uninjured, safe slant to wife, whom I'm waiting on, while failing to master horrible Ferber's solve your child's sleep problems, and wondering what in wife makes her mine and me not hers. Poor injured dictionary, still managing to be Germanically helpful, says wife once meant only woman, sans spouse or helpmate, from the Hebrew helpmeet, noun meaning please meet me here on our couch tonight so we can unerotically watch television and rock unsomnolent Francis, you having spared me my rib because God somehow didn't know I needed you to come back to me with all and only your own. Okay. So the next poem is called Chrissys' Hat. And Chrissy is my wife, and the hat is, I'm just going to tell you so you don't miss it. The pink hat, you know, that everybody was wearing during the Women's March. I'm not going to say what it was called because this is on TV, I'm told. So I didn't want you to miss that. This is Chrissy's hat. She's late, her coat buttoned, Pepto pink hat, angrily knitted by a Nebraskan woman, double-pointed like cat ears, pulled tight over her forehead. She leans over me to drip the antibiotic drops into my swollen eye. The kid's late for school after 2 days out. Every day now she wears the hat. And it's working about as well as that amulet we bought 3 days before the invasion of Iraq at the Voodoo Shrine across the street from where Marie Laveau is buried. Gree, you can pouch. Gree, you can pouch over your heart, but a hat you have to wear like a helmet against incoming missives, posts, the murmuration of tiny, tiny birds tweeting Razor's song. Hat, cover us. We need our minds and our hearts. Cover me, supine on this rug, receiving medicine. This, the color now of a photonegative, gradually developing in the reddish lit dark room of now, that is perhaps only the exposure of one rainy evening in 1999, taken in that rented one-bedroom apartment before when we could take our time, looking each other up and down, her cheek and hour against my chest, before we dressed and metroed to the uptown, where we could hand over 2 good hours to Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, a bad actor showing us waking from perfect life to reality. And afterward, along Connecticut Avenue, the dripping fire escapes anointing our heads with our lack of fortune-telling ability, and the movie, still just a movie, and not yet a dirty mirror. And we weren't in need of waking, and we didn't have to go home if we didn't want to. So Sternella Magna is the scientific name for the eastern meadowlark, and it literally translates to large little starling. So the title of this is this next poem is Sternella Magna. A few days shy of 8 months old, you're watching your hands turn the laminated chart of local birds we keep on the coffee table. You guide it to your lips and hold it there for the few seconds you can to gum the corner featuring the eastern meadowlark, supposed year-round bird I've never seen. Everyone's gone to work, and you and I on the floor face each other in our way of not manufacturing custom curtain rods or handling customer service calls or leveling ground for an essential structure. You're giggling because you can sit now without tipping, and when your hands disappear, you can make them come back. And the meadowlark's song I found on a website for you to listen to auto-repeats its pitch of tiny hunger, collected perhaps years ago by a microphone hidden in the grass near the opening of its arch-over nest of woven weeds. I'm just talking now, my large little starling, knowing English carries only enough to comfort you. My words, like your fingers, always arriving again after they've gone hiding. So, y'all know how the robots are going to come and replace us. And I mean, my wife is an economist, and so she's been warning me about the robots, and one may show up and replace me right now. So I just wrote a poem to my Swiss Army knife in response to that. It's called Swiss Army Knife. Swiss Army knife, even from inside my pocket, muffled by my grip, you couldn't help but overhear the radio forecasting the robots soon to replace each of us. Fold us like the mini scissors, the main spear point blade, the bottle opener / flathead screwdriver that people you. You who can cut and uncork and even pick teeth, designed by a Swiss army that loved us at least enough to have fashioned your instruments all in one, then so generously threw in that slender mystery implement, with its sharp edge paralleled by a groove, tipped like a beak, a hole where the eye would be if it were a seahawk. Who will remain to ponder its true purpose? Who will be left to extract a splinter with the tweezers so surprisingly concealed within your riverstone smooth red length? Knife, I'm also designed for carrying, and all I have in my hands is you and a sweaty draft of this little machine of my words I'm slowly assembling. So I wanted to just read a few from my chapbook called Good Housekeeping, and I have like 1,000 copies of them, and I'm just desperately trying to get rid of them. So if you're interested, please see me afterwards, and I do like a pay what you wish sort of deal, or what you can. So anyways, I have a bunch of them. So I'm going to read this next poem because my teacher, Liz Reese, is here. So I've been studying with Liz forever, and this is a poem that she likes from this, or unless she says to me that she likes it. I don't know. Maybe she, yeah, she has to say that. So I'm up here. So so this one is my son James, when he was very little, had these imaginary friends called Giga and Baba, and this is Giga and Baba at Moon, and it has a little epigraph from Dr. Spock. And he says, if he is spending a good part of each day telling about imaginary friends, it raises the question whether his real life is satisfying enough. Giga and Baba at Moon. Giga and Baba come back from the moon. It's so cold, and you weigh even less there than in my son's imagination. Only yesterday, you crashed down to our kitchen floor, still dizzy from the fall, when he called to you, Giga and Baba over there. But today, Giga and Baba at Moon. Why such a short time on Earth? Giga and Baba, come back. Let me treat you to a steak dinner, Manhattans, a midnight show of Casablanca. We'll sit in the front row and crane our necks so Ingrid Bergman can become the world, so we can make believe the smoke rising from Bogart's mouth conceals a passage to a place where I'm not the only one who will remember you. Okay, this one is called Ultrasound. There are a lot of ultrasound poems now. It seems like it's the poetic technology. You're able to kind of see something that you're really not supposed to see. Ultrasound. Before your mother wakes, I press my ear to her belly so I can be alone with you. My ear to the skin the sonographer's wand passed over, releasing your heartbeat, tracing your body, lemon-sized, in shadows made of sound. You'll be here come autumn, I almost whisper, but I know so little. I spoke to the one who came before you, your sister, read to her, played music, and how silently she left, her fingers printless, her last beat near still. Its vibration didn't sound, only echoed back to her mother's body, telling it, let go. Okay. I have a couple more, I think. So this poem is called JFK to LAX, and that's the two airports. At any given moment within the airport, there is an exact count of underwear pairs, a certain number of teeth. I find myself always in the airport, always about to go somewhere. Alphanumeric gates, heels click-clack against porcelain tiles, smoke of the last remaining cigarette lounges, mingling, then separating, like once lovers who pass each other, faces buried in divergent itineraries. Only once have I fallen in love in the airport in my dreams, despite the ceaseless beat of people, despite California, named for an imaginary island of Amazons bearing gold shields. And I think I'll stop with this one called I Love You as an Insurance Adjuster. You should always stop with a love poem. And so this was inspired by a Kenneth Koch poem called To You, which I think starts out with this line like, I love you as a sheriff searches for a walnut or something like that. Is that right? Yeah, if you know that poem. Anyways. I love you as a sapper sweeps for mines, when I wake in the dark, needing to piss. I stagger to the toilet through the field of your scattered shoes, and one buried in the shag rug goes off, sending me tumbling. How can I not then love you as an insurance adjuster who should phone the bean counters in Hartford to report my twisted ankle, but instead dwells on the precise contours of your breasts and aches to comb for evidence in your hair, having become just a love-struck suit who by night's end can do nothing but fax his claim to an unmanned office in Omaha. All right, thank you.
So I'll say we do have our three poets tonight. Clara has arrived, but we're going to next have Michael Gushue read his poems. I've known Michael's poems for a long time, I think. I think it feels like a long time. Actually, Michael and Abigail, isn't Abigail here? Yeah, there you are. And Kim Roberts and Dan Vera. Was there a fifth? Yeah, Eric. Were here about 3 years ago in 2015. You know, there are a group of poets who work, who meet together and go, I guess, pump each other up and enjoy each other's poems. And it was a very vigorous evening. And I had made some remarks that night, but I didn't go back and look at them. I still had them because I started looking at Michael's poems, reading Michael's poems again, and I did eventually go back, and I was, and I'll just one or two lines. But you know, I don't know what poems you're going to be reading tonight, but he has such range. I mean, there are different modes. They're reflective, philosophical, literary, restrained, and improvisatory. I mean, and it's not that it's all over the map. It's just engaging. And it's engaging with language, and there's comedy. And when I say comedy, that's sometimes, for poets, for novelists, you say it's a great comic novel. For poets, you say it's comic, it's like the kiss of death. But comedy is serious, and or can be serious. One of his poems, just by the title you can imagine, it's called The Kama Sutra for Older Couples. So just the title itself, but the poem itself is really terrific. But it's in the diction and the punning. If we had world enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime, that poem of Andrew Marvell. Well, here's Michael's. How does it go? He writes, we had world enough and time, why is there something rather than nothing? If we had whirl enough and truth. And then there are these allusions in many of his poems. So that's that literary part. And then there's that philosophical part. And so it seems to me, or not more than seems to me, there's heft to these poems. They have dimension. I sound like his publicist, but I'm not, and not to embarrass Michael. I've often had a rule for myself, I think, that, and I see it in prose and poetry, that when you get adjective-noun combinations, things can start to sound sing-songy. They can be trite. The rules are there to be broken. I'm just going to read a few lines from one of these poems called again, I don't know if you had a Valediction, Forbidden Morning by Donne in here, but this is a Valediction on the whereabouts of the self. So I'm just going to read a few short stanzas. Was that you the day before that day, facing mirrors, the dimming green depths? No, it was memory's ruthless allegiance to a past, and memory lies. You watched the ginkgo's yellow leaves spiral and fall onto a lake's glittering veneer, or watched divots of snow plummet from the sycamore-mottled branches, steam rising from your mouth in the stringent cold. Now, there are three stanzas. Each one ends with an adjective noun, and yet you don't get stuck on them. Partly it's enjambment, the line is running over, but it's, ruthless allegiance, glittering veneer, stringent cold, but the line doesn't end there. And when I went back and looked at some of the comments that I had made, the thing that I pulled out was the one thing that I feel in Michael's poems are surprises. You're often surprised. And I think he may be surprised also by, no surprise for the author, no surprise for the reader. Anyway, it's really great to have you here tonight.
Hi, Merle. Thank you so much for having me here, and for that introduction, setting me up. But we'll go forward. Since I was going to make a big introduction to this, but since you already mentioned it, I'll probably start off with this poem. And also, I usually introduce this poem by saying it's a poem about a description of sexual positions for people who have been married quite a while. But since you mentioned it, Kama Sutra for older couples, I think I just have to go from there. Given that this might be available to the public, I will start off by saying it's PG 15 something. So, a Kama Sutra for older couples. When a man lies on his stomach with his limbs akimbo, snoring, and the woman sits up and watches a Game of Thrones on her laptop, that is called the beached walrus. When a woman is lying comfortably on her left side and the man reaches over her to grab her chocolate chip cookie, but then hits her in the eye with his elbow, that is known as the clumsy fox. When a man lies on his side, immobile, and the woman lies between the man and the wall, that is called the trapped bladder. When a woman is curled up with her hands under her cheek, and the man gets out of bed to get a glass of water, that is known as the spy who wanted a slice of cake. When a woman is trying to read and the man turns from one side to the other repeatedly, that is called the annoying fish. When the family dog is sleeping between the man and the woman, and the man is pushed closer and closer to the edge of the bed, that is known as the roadrunner tricks the coyote again. When a man in the bathroom is brushing his teeth and the water running, and the woman asks him a question from the bedroom which he cannot hear, that is called the deaf husband. When the man and woman lie next to each other and the phone on the other side of the room rings, that is called the Mexican standoff. And when a woman and man face each other, arms and limbs tangled together, and talk of inconsequential things and make each other laugh deep into the night, this is known as the marital bliss for reals. I'm going to actually take an intermission from my stuff and read a poem. I try to slip someone else's poems into readings when I get a chance, and I want to do that now. And I usually try to pick someone who's died recently, and this past year was a tough one. We lost, I'm going to mention these names, and I want you to go out and read them as a home assignment. Derek Walcott is a master of language. Richard Wilbur also, and particularly John Ashbery, who is just, no adjective is adequate for him. However, I'm going to read someone who is new to me. Her name is Karen Soley. She's Canadian. She grew up on the Canadian prairie, and she's just fabulous. And I'm just going to read a short poem called Your New News Hour is Now 2 Hours. Gratitude towards the houseplants, shame for what they must endure. Of particular concern, the azalea, flowering like the gestures and cries of someone off the trail who sees a helicopter. A long, cold night is coming on. Is it dying or being killed? When I'm 100% on what's happening, there's still that niggling 5. Too much water, neglect, information. Decisions made at the executive level. Science tells us plants emit signals and responses on yet another frequency we cannot hear. That's all we need. When little, we were told our heads were in the clouds. Now we suspect the opposite. So, okay, so my little boost for that. I'm going to read up. There's a few things I told myself I would never do as a poet. One was write prose poems, the other was do a collaboration, and not out of principle. I just couldn't imagine how any of this would happen. So a prose poem and a collaboration, and write a poem about Persephone. And of course I went on to do all three in the same year. So I started this bunch of collaborative poems on email with an author, a real writer, C.L. Bledsoe, who has novels and short stories and poetry and things like that. And we did a whole bunch of them, and we ended up putting out a book called I Never Promised You a Sea Monkey. And I'm going to read one from this, and then we'll move on from there. So C.L. Blood's also great, really great writer, really a fun guy. And what we do, we try to like surprise each other or make each other laugh or, something like that. So this is called Future Events Like These Will Affect You in the Future. In the future, we will live in tubes with a steady stream of cat videos pumped directly into our brains. The wealthiest man in the world will be the one who designed our pillows. Everyone will be named Sam, but we still won't remember. The asteroids will come, but no one will notice because we'll all be on a retreat from social media. The sky will turn pink, which will make my daughter ecstatic. Dinosaurs will stumble the earth. Squirrels will leave to colonize the forests of Mars and send us all postcards on our birthdays. Voting for public elections will be done by counting likes on Facebook. We wrote this before the election, but anyway. A hamster with cancer will be elected dictator for life. There will be a pill for everything except having difficulty swallowing. The roads will be torn up and replaced with more roads. In the future, books will sweat when we read them. Everyone will be Mary Tyler Moore for 15 minutes, and we will all be loved. Tables will clean themselves off, and no one will use them anyway. Chairs will be something that happens to other people. Our likes and dislikes will be tracked by microchips that monitor our gag reflex. Balloons will sink while we float into the sky, regretting nothing. Soon, we'll find out that all those quarters we've lost have been secretly plotting against us the whole time. We'll wake from our coffins every 3 days, weep for 2 hours, and then go jogging. When we get back home, all the rooms will smell like loss. And I forget when I started. Okay, so I'm going to read a somewhat newer poem. Partially because of John Ashbery, I thought I would just try and cast a really big net across language and see where it took me. So I tried to be as open as possible to whatever would come into the poem, and not be too dictatorial about where it needs to go. So this is I've been doing that for a little bit, and it's been interesting. This is called Let Us Swiftly Fly, Let Us Hasten to the Gate of Ivory. Now, the title has nothing whatsoever to do with the poem. It's important to recognize that so you won't be misled. William was itching to get his hands on the delicate saffron tail feathers that polarized our quaint little troop into bobwhites on one side of the table, and in the field, the raucous guffaws of the mostly agnostic crows. Then the highfalutin chicanery Walter spun from straw erupted like pine grosbeaks past the winter range, barreling in suddenly at top speed and full of the usual excuse. How important hierarchy is to the classist magpie nests that seem to heap up around us when in season, or else hunker down when tracer bullets sing overhead like the choir of tuned anvils in Das Rheingold. The journey to thoughtlessness isn't for everyone, although it is. The negatives are brittle and faded, in the most cloying manner possible. The old neurotic drawer, anointed by the twitch of the death nerve, a serenade of wood ducks and partridges. What's it like to be bird-dogged that hard? You can't sustain that kind of attention, Anne tells us, when the holly tree's carceral archipelagos are packed to the gills with cedar waxwings, bustling unseen behind the spiked shields of the leaves. Everyone knows what these migrants teach us. The cacophony of the epilogue is found buried in its own anarchy, an obelisk sculpted in a salt mine, where the most lackluster coven of ravens, no matter how inauspicious that seems, always reaches escape velocity. There's no other word for it, all too quickly, although its vapor trails linger rapturously in our naked palms. Don't ask. So one of my other obsessions have been movies, and not just writing poems about movies, but movies generally. It was great to hear references to movies and things in poems. I think that's always necessary. I don't think anyone should write a poem without mentioning some movie. Most people break this rule, including me. Yeah. So I started on a bunch sort of inspired by movies I had not seen recently that I'd seen like many, many years ago. Without revisiting the movie, I just wanted to see what I had in there on it. So it's that knowing what is being referenced here is not necessary, but it's an interesting footnote to what I'm doing. This poem is called La Jetée, 1962, which is a short French film. It's just like a science fiction film about a time traveler who has this obsessive memory of being at the airport in Orly and seeing a woman and seeing a man fall. World War III comes and he's sent back in time. He meets the woman that he remembers from his childhood. They get involved with each other. He does various other things and ends up at that same jetty on that same day he remembers as a child, but himself as an adult looking for the woman. So that's this again over here. So La Jetée, 1962. The past is a liquid where memory drowns. Your childhood, a ghost in a world, disappeared beneath the chop and spray of history's black waters. An enormous hall filled with animals' bones, white scaffolding, frozen postures, attack, transmigration, curates your present. Echoes poised between restraint and devastation. Where is the now of remembering? Where is its coming to light? Where does it dwell in its slumber? Where does it go after all? The future bleeds into the past. It waits on a concrete jetty where jets heave themselves into the dark air, where desire is a wound of nature, where there is no escape from time. So influences. I was reading this. I ended up reading a whole bunch of this author, a novelist called David Markson, who I recommend highly. I think Writer's Block is named one of them. I'm blanking out on the names of them, but they all have a very interesting form. They're all little sort of index cards of facts, which end up being a kind of story if you read them carefully enough. Anyway, his style sort of invaded me for a while, and this poem is sort of the result of that. So it's all statements and then another statement, and we'll see where it goes. So it's called The Haphazard Traveling Salesman of America Problem. The haphazard traveling salesman is a famous sort of probability math problem where if you have a salesman has to visit a certain number of things and he does it randomly, how long does it take him to do that? So, probably the pure light pouring from my body blinded you to my selfless message of hope and peace. First, the cats are going to take over. The cats will be our gods. They purr and rub against us. They kill birds and small animals. By cats, I mean feral cats. No doubt I'm correcting myself there. Words are imperfect and imprecise. The limits of my bank account are the limits of my world. And, as you can see, I'm not an heiress. Certainly the parking garage will be our contribution to world culture. The 5-hour energy drink will be our contribution to world culture. No doubt world culture is indifferent to my choice of beverage. No doubt I am trying to find the shortest route here. There's no such thing as real randomness. No doubt by randomness, I mean a sequence of events following no intelligible pattern and or combination. Post-traumatic stress syndrome is the new black. No doubt objectless rage is the new compassion. It appears as if meaning erodes over time. No doubt, as Wallace Stevens says, money is a kind of parasite, though in most cases undoubtedly dormant. Probably you missed my message of hope and or peace. No doubt it is in need of clarification. It is clear the future will be arriving shortly. I suspect in the form of a destructive fluid. There will probably be wreckage, no doubt bobbing to the surface at the end of the movie. It's possible we're already drowning. There's no doubt we're drowning, although certainly the flood has yet to arrive. Okay, I'm gonna, it's funny you made the, I'm gonna read it, actually, Merrill mentioned the Valediction poem on something, on the whereabouts of the self. I wrote a few of those trying to be clever. So, so I'm going to read one called, and they're all sort of like the Valediction, which is for Donne. It's kind of a weird love poem. So these are also sort of weird love poems, although they're weird. So, a Valediction forbidding semiotics. The more you know, the more you don't know. You ask the mountain, and the mountain says, just go away. Or else everything is the river. And if it's not the river, it's in the river. And the ferryman can't break a 20. And the Tao that is spoken cannot be found online. And if it's not one thing, it's another. And whose weird theory is that anyway? What I'm trying to say is, I don't know you. On the other hand, limits are what we have. It's either how fast or which way, choice of coleslaw or fries, wave or particle. What it's like to be you is beyond me. You might be a moth dreaming I'm a magnet, dreaming I'm a fishnet, dreaming you're pollen. But it's not what you know. Even when we're not talking, we're talking. Words are thrown out to see what the other will say. Because it's not wisdom that we want, but valence. So no semiotics, please. Dry those signifiers. We want even leaving to be an event. String of air, axioms, not exits or billboards. What we say to each other is 1 part cinder, 2 parts ruby-throated psyche. Words are not signage. Words are what happen. Exposure and a bereavement, euphoros, full loving. They fill a comb of cells, forging the lips of roses, the burst heat of asters and cosmos. They hold in them the dark nectar hidden in things. And moving on. So that poem is from a chapbook I put out called Pachinko Mouth, and this next one is too. This is also sort of a love poem, maybe. You know, there's the English tradition, the gather you rosebuds while you may, which is when it's really, you know, it's sort of like a Me Too, where you write to where a male poet is writing to a woman in hopes of romancing her. So probably not something That would go over so well, but let's see. This is, it's called Poem Beginning Inappropriately with a Line by Marion Moore. What are years? What is our innocence? And what's that stuff in a lava lamp? A sort of wax, a kind of water, but mostly globs of random, half weather pattern, half cosmic static. Innocence I don't know beans about, or guilt, but say instead lump it. We're not on trial, we're trial offers to each other. It's a banana peel cosmos, baby, and you can't control freak how to slip, but you know when I fall, I want to fall for you. Why? Because lava lamps tell time, because there's a lot of beauty in chaos, and there's a lot of blob in gloop. The lamp's red puddle turns pillar and buds taller as it melts, and spells out, love like life is lava. That's no blurb. What is it time tells us? To rise towards each other. If we pull apart, break up, it's the heat building inside. If we hunker down, we're one. So, love, let's go and let's let go and come with the flow. Let's bump meltingly like two. Let's let some wild joy erupt through us, buoy us all night, until the very last lights bleb out. I'm doing okay for time? Okay. I've got just two more on the serious side. Being winter, I'm going to read a poem about winter. And the winter sky, as far as stars go, is really probably more interesting than other skies, partly because the air always seems clearer, but there's always a lot of good things to look at. That's where you see Orion. And also something called the winter hexagon, which this poem is about. The winter hexagon. Aldebaran, Pollux, Rigel, Procyon, Sirius, Capella. What do I want from these lights? To pull in their steerage and wake, to pace and stride of their height as it crosses the arc of my watch. Belted cloud of stars, bright stream, all things move and are fixed. Chance and force cast up my gaze upon the strand, as if someone had placed me here, or carried me like silk thread blown by wind. How often has unease been my sextant? I have been careless with words, and rich in my abandoning. My own heart has been a sea, less traceable than the water, whose flow and tide I can't plot even now in this late hour. Deep into the night, the stars are present in their scatter and their order. Each light reaches back along a stalk made of time, each stalk a different length, though at this moment all one cluster, one quorum, like the flower white frost reed, like the flower farewell summer. And the brightest are 6 knots in a dark gathering net, the great winter hexagon, because winter is near, ready to lay its palm on my shoulder, to call me, to weigh me on its crystalline scales. Thank you.
Okay, here we are. So Clara has arrived earlier, and I'm sure the shakes are now gone from having rushed down here. I just want to say something personally. I first met Clara in May, and and got some of her poems. And then I got on the web, on the internet, and for those of you who are interested in what we still call experimental poetry, Clara has taken a lot of that on in terms of having a conversation with it, trying to explore that. It's difficult work for many of us who are working in linear forms or in narrative kind of forms, but that work that is exploring those boundaries. It really would be interesting to look Clara up. You'll find a lot of work. In fact, since that time, I've really tried keeping up with all the work that she's done, and at least that I have found on the internet. I wrote her this summer after having read one of the chapbook manuscripts, and I think the thing that there are different reactions that I've had to the work. A kind of stateliness of movement. Subjects and the diction, vocabulary that would be unusual for many writers, I think. By that I mean the vocabulary, scientific vocabulary, foreign words, allusions, but particularly science. And here is a line from one of the poems. She'll write of, for example, of rhizomes and microbes and electrolytes, AI or artificial intelligence, Afrobots, Euro apps, a line such as this, for example. Euglanus and amoebas fuse to form altruistic microbes, continuing the cycle of living codes producing electrolytes and dopamine, while my father fishes for eel to roast. So this kind of concatenation of language that is seemingly arcane, but it's a language that is trying to be appropriated for poetry. And often there are a number of poems that that are in prose lines. We have a poem that in your program here that is not, but where very political. In fact, I was looking on the web, on the internet a couple of days ago, and there are a series of 10 poems that go together, and you'll find things that are right up to the minute now with politics, Trump, everything that has so engaged us, that is, for many of us, has taken over our lives, that it's become like a virus that's invaded the body. But you'll see, if you take a look at her work, I think you'll be surprised. So I was going to read a poem, or part of a poem, but I think I would let Clara come up and let us hear it in your own voice. So it's I'm really happy to welcome her. And Clara's been in a workshop that you have been doing, right? Anne, or no? I thought that she had been.
Well, very kind. Have a bit of a scratchy throat. I hope you can hear me. I want to thank the organizers, particularly Merrill. I didn't meet him at a poetry event. I met him at a political event. Every time I write a poem that has allusions to politics or gender or race or class, I swear to myself, I'll never write another poem like that again. But invariably, those themes enter my poetry at one level or another. I am not going to read experimental poetry today. If anyone does want to talk about that afterwards, I'd be happy to. There are very easy ways to enter certain types of experimental poetry, such as associative poetry, quote unquote, idea poetry, collage poetry, the kind of poetry that some of you have read, particularly if you know John Ashbery, who we lost a few months ago. Now, I wrote a brief series of poems about a year ago when there was a great deal of media attention to terrorism. And as the CIA used to say, they don't say this any longer, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I'm sure some of you have heard that before. So I decided, as I thought about writing poetry about these media events, I thought about how the mothers of these men felt. And I wanted to write a brief series of poems from the mother's voice. This one is called Haibun for Radicalized Sons. And a haibun is a prose poem followed by a haiku. Haibun for Radicalized Sons. You dreamed of a voyage with Darwin, your sons chasing finches, riding tortoises, remembering when they could not color between the lines, when they traded basketballs for handguns or for suicide belts. Chicago and Ben Gardain, not too different than London or San Pedro in your mind. Or America from Tunisia, where their brothers cry for them each time they part. And you ululate with broken heart. They are your sons of color, networks of rage, their revolutions, impulsive storms, like furies at Tierra del Fuego, or the Cape a continent away, alienated and marginalized by capital, contempt for your weakness, repulsed by your contented mien, living within borders bound by home. Like Darwin at Down House, you wanted nothing more than to sit at tables, preparing specimens for display in locked cases, sons deracinated on dusty streets. You remember them, cooing in your folded arms, blossoming flowers. The next one is titled The Other Side of the Coin, again from a mother's voice. My heart is heavy because my son has been radicalized through no fault of my own. How can a boy become rudderless in a world with so many choices? He drove a cab for 3 years, but that wasn't good enough, so he went to work for Walmart to get a medical plan. He thinks he's worth more than $9 an hour, but he dropped out of trade school. So what does he expect? His brother never complains, always gives me $10 a week that I save in my purse for a rainy day. My son says I'm crazy, and I guess I am. Things haven't been the same since my cat disappeared. It's a bad idea to love something that can die, but what choice did I have when she jumped in my arms while I was riding the carousel in Wildwood? Last year I found a Dayglow green sweater at Goodwill, but the color clashed with my pink skirt. My son calls me a bag lady, but I know he doesn't mean it. He only hurts my feelings so that I will see the other side of the coin. Everybody has a story. And this one is titled, or entitled, Yours Truly, Alienated. She has no private life. Motherhood consumes her from inside out, like her father's game, a smothering, a pillow leading to remorseful sex, a pillow cover monogrammed in Wedgwood blue, a bee stitched in Ariel like something remarkable, an infant's fontanelle, a melting ice cap, a radicalized son punishing himself for the scars she left in his synapses, chemical traces of a different sort of jihad, another type of suicide bomb, familial disease carried from the Kalahari to Jamestown, from Lee Street to Brook Road, from New Jersey to Sri Lanka, the barrenness of a brain after shock therapy, or of a chamber before filling, blood red as cayenne, or his lips burning from lust. No division between home and work, her grief exposed as poems written for dead jihadis and for their mothers, catatonic as mammals in torpor, or patients hypnotized by shiny objects, swinging in front of hazy eyes and somnolent brains. I try not to fall in love with any of my poems, and this isn't one that I've really fallen in love with. I was advised by a professor in graduate school never to fall in love with your work, but I like this one. This one is called Where Mothers Stop Weaving. The mountains are not waiting to be climbed, nor oceans sailed. Poets are not waiting to inspire, nor women toil for lace or textiles, wrought by weathered hands near deserts, wilderness. Rugged wives obeying nature's rules, haplotypes bound like lion prides, spooled like bothrops, settled like rhizomes, brown with loam, where terror's psychology turns on whether bombers were enemies or sons drinking warm Coke from stained cups, Rorschachs of unconscious fates. O tempora, O mores, since somewhere a defense minister takes notes with an extra fine pilot G, green ink marking a general's report printed on paper, the color of sky after rain or of a sun's skin after death, wet from Indus's overflow, a sailor's breeze sneaking up sleeves of a shirt belonging to an older brother fighting somewhere on a day too still for laughter. The shortest day is long to households in Kabul, destined to fall if its roads are bombed, where mothers stop weaving when power is a function of unknowns, F of X, and sons have left home to join a different tribe. My mouth is very dry. I think this will be the last one, maybe. Can I help, or would that cause more pain? This one is not from a mother's voice, but from the voice of a young woman who may or may not be on the path to radicalization. Can I help, or would that cause more pain? I am a self-hating Negro who lives in a prison of her own making. My psychiatrist specializes in mood disorders, and most of her clients are alienated members of the Black underclass. She told me to call her Carol, because a feminist collective is opposed to hierarchy, and because last names remind her of male oppression. Carol was once married to Dr. Ken Grander, a physical anthropologist widely known for his research on African American sexual habits. His most famous paper presents data proving that the average circumferences of flaccid penises do not differ significantly between Negro and Danish men. Carol said that Ken is brilliant but sexually repressed, except after watching videos of his naturalistic studies. After her divorce, Carol and her partner adopted a Negro boy named Leslie and are raising them according to the non-binary principles of the late sociologist Sandy Bem. Because Carol is transparent with me, I hide nothing from her, and have shared my plan to travel to Yemen and join a charismatic religious group. Carol suggested that before I leave, I should read the prize-winning book, Tribal Governments Today, so I won't experience culture shock when I arrive. She renewed my Lamictal prescription for 6 months, enough time to decide whether to stay in the Middle East. I was shy about saying that I've met a Tunisian man online who promises that he will make me happy by teaching me to serve a higher purpose. Maybe he's Buddhist, and we will transcend self together. But if Ahmed has something else in mind, I'm certain it will be for my own good. Carol always tells me I have an adventurous spirit, and I feel prepared for any challenge. I don't know if oh, thank you so much. Seltzer. This one is titled Seagulls, and it's for a friend that I had when I was in graduate school. He was a postdoc. I was a grad student, and he studied frogs, communication in frogs, and he was in Texas at night on a dirt road. Recording vocalizations, and was hit by a hit-and-run driver. And this one is Seagulls for the late Jasper Loftus Hills. I have been here before, but not alone. I have been here before when seagulls swarmed and sandpipers swept, searching for life to fell in an instant. When a flash storm soaked our shirts and sandwiches, when you said, we need a bigger boat. When the house across the bay was painted the color of my amulet, not blue, but cerulean, mixed with sunlight, children leering through gossamer curtains, faded as my memory of our failures, your palm resting on my knee like a scale, reptilian lamella shielding arteries ancient as gar, or vessels divided like sand marking high tide from low. When I said moral and mortal and marital in the same breath, a woman who could cite the kindest of all kind men, the dullest seagulls trapped in the dullest sky, not solemn, but grateful for another day familiar as my own face, aged by an excess of salty air, or by a memory of your face, callow and tan, wading into the water, climbing onto the hull. Thank you.
I'm not sure where an hour and a half has gone, or almost, it seems. So let's please have a hand for Jason Gebhardt, Michael Gushue, and Clara Jones. Thank you. As I said, you know, we have these, we enter into these different poetic universes, as I said in the beginning, and I guess that's always the case. But, you know, we've been doing this now for a number of years. And at least for those of you who are writing poems, there are all sorts of entryways, different ideas that just arise tonight, it seems to me. At any rate, we're going to get together. We have a very modest, and I say very, I go in fear of adjectives, but modest, very modest reception. And you know, let's all join out there and you know, have, you know, speak to each other. Okay, thank you for coming.